I don't just talk about other people's stuff, I also make my own. Books in particular. To date, I have 4 books you can check out on Amazon. Operation Red Dragon: The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and the short story collection Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Hop on down to the description for Amazon links to all 4 books. Enjoy whichever ones you read, and enjoy the video.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am the Omni viewer, and July is going to be heavily centered on music, so I thought while I was getting the scripted videos put together, I'd do a little unscripted video that I've been meaning to get around to, but I'm only just getting around to it now because I just got the albums I want to talk about. What we'll be doing today is looking at 2 debut albums. Albums from 2 bands that just dropped their first albums this year. Again, they've both been out for a little bit now, but I only just got my hands on them, I've listened to them both, and now I want to see which of these bands made a better debut, a better first impression. Our subjects today are SheWolf, with a self-titled debut, and The Big Deal with their album First Bite. I figure it's appropriate to compare these two because they're both in the rock and heavy metal genres, they're both fronted by female vocalists, and, well, like I said, they both debuted this year. So which of these two had the stronger debut? I'll just be rambling for a little bit to see if we can figure it out. Let's start with overall premise of the band, recognizability, you might even say a gimmick. Now, I know there's some debate about whether or not bands need gimmicks. With some people saying, oh, you don't really need a gimmick in order to stand out, you just need good music. But on the other hand, some people are saying, well, a gimmick can help give a band a particular focus, and it makes them easier to recognize. I think either one is good. I mean, technically bands like The Who didn't need a gimmick, or Pink Floyd or those bands. They just needed good music in order to thrive, and they did. But at the same time, I mean, you have Alice Cooper, you have Kiss, more recently you have Victorious, of course, and Sabaton, and so many different bands focusing around a particular thing and giving themselves an aesthetic that's more recognizable. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it can be good. The music still has to work, of course, but I'm not opposed to gimmicks. SheWolf definitely has a gimmick. As you can probably guess from the name, it has to do with wolves. But it's not like that other band that's wolf-centric. You see, that other band is Powerwolf. And Powerwolf draws heavily from the idea of using werewolves as their main aesthetic, but they draw heavily from European folklore and combining it with vampire and werewolf cinema and stories and Catholic imagery in order to create this odd horror music landscape that's technically power metal but has a heavy gothic atmosphere hanging over it. Now, SheWolf doesn't do that. SheWolf is a bit more Celtic in a way. They're not actually Celtic, mind you, their lead singer is from Greece, but that's more the aesthetic they're going for, something a bit more shamanistic. Naturally, this plays into their costumes. They look like this. Only our lead singer has her face visible, and she's wearing this long flowing gown. She's got what looks like ritualistic makeup painted on her, wearing natural forest green colors and whatnot. And the other 3 members of the band, they're anonymous. They are only known as the Hunter, the Predator, and the Alpha. And they've got these costumes that are putting more emphasis on fur and have these snarling lupine masks that make them look like wolves. And that's not just for show either. Everything about them relates back to that concept. The lyrics of their songs are written from a wolfish perspective, whether it's talking about hunting or having a pack or their relationship to the moon or what have you, just being out in the forest. Their music in particular has a sort of folky tune to it. I guess you could call it melodic folk power metal in a way. That's the best I can think of, because admittedly I haven't listened to every genre of music in the world, but their music certainly is distinct, and it again plays into that idea of having more of a Celtic shamanistic sound. And overall, it's an aesthetic that really stands out. Again, like, there's another band out there that's really big that has wolf in the name and plays to wolf ideas, but SheWolf sets itself apart. And if I show you a picture of what they look like, you would instantly know, hey, that's SheWolf. A song might even pop right into your head as soon as you see the image. So that's a very strong concept, a very strong idea, and they commit fully to it. And as a result, they do stand out. As for the big deal, they don't really have a gimmick as far as I can tell. They have a stylized logo, and they do have a particular unified aesthetic in what they wear, but that unified aesthetic is essentially just leather and biker clothes, which, I mean, that was fine back in the days when, like, Judas Priest were just starting out, but in this day and age, it's kind of cliche. I mean, I'm sorry to say that, but it's not necessarily the sort of outfit that's really going to jump out at anyone. At least it's all unified, of course. I do get the impression that it's deliberate, too, though. I think clearly they're going for more of a retro idea. They want to be the new classic rock band, if you will. And their music plays into that as well. It has a very sort of like late 70s through 80s sort of rock sound. And it's a sound that does work. Lyrically, they don't have any unifying concept, though. They don't have lyrics that are about some sort of idea, some sort of lifestyle. In a general sense, they're describing typical rock and roll subjects like sensations or things like that. You know what I'm talking about, I hope. So there are some songs that are slightly more narrative, but not by much. And as a result, they don't necessarily stand out as much in that regard. It's not that they have a weak aesthetic, mind you. It's just that, well, if I were to put the two bands side by side and ask you just off the top of your head to identify them both, you'd have a much easier time identifying SheWolf than you would identifying The Big Deal. And that's just the way of it. They have made a choice. I'm not saying it was a bad choice, but it is a choice that can affect them potentially in an age where everyone is adopting a gimmick in order to stand out. It might be a risk that pays off, who knows, but in terms of recognizability and overall concept, SheWolf definitely comes out as the stronger band. However, these are bands we're talking about, bands that play music. And like I said earlier, even if you have a good gimmick, you gotta have good music to go along with it, or else it's just not gonna work. Which sometimes leaves me amazed that Kiss somehow managed to survive, because I listened to their first album once. But anyway, we're not talking about that. So, in that regard, we need to determine whose album was a stronger debut by way of listening to it, actually listening to what it sounds like. Before we get into that, though, I'd like to explain, for the benefit of those who may not know about it, the idea of an A-side album, or a front-loaded album, if you will. The idea is that back in the days when music was distributed on vinyl records, well, records were considered a great way to distribute music, of course, but you could only fit so much music on one side of them. So music was put on both sides, and you'd have to flip it over in order to hear both sides and hear the whole album. The first side of the album was usually called the A side, and the other half was the B side. And the A side is where the lead singles went. Those were where the songs that would get the most play on the radio, the songs that were sent out that would get the most requests to concerts, the songs everybody knows, those are usually on the A side. And the B side, generally speaking, was where the filler went. the songs that didn't have as many fans, or the songs that were just plain bad or forgettable. Now, not every album was like that, of course. There are plenty of bands who can make a consistent album from beginning to end. But in a general sense, it is possible to have an album that front-loads all of the good material and discards the bad material to the other side, the B-side. And the funny thing is that even as the method of music distribution has evolved, that hasn't really changed all that much. Like, there was a time it stuck around because it was thought the replacement for vinyl records would be cassette tapes. And cassette tapes, again, you'd have to eject them and flip them over in order to listen to the full album. But then came CDs, where you could fit all the music on one side. You didn't have to flip anything. And now, of course, we live in the age of digital music, where there is no physical media. You can just download any song you want, or all of the songs from a particular album. And yet, for some reason, the practice of putting all the good stuff in the forefront and having the back half of the album just sort of be bland and forgettable is still around. I don't know why. I guess old habits die hard. So I bring all of that up because SheWolf's self-titled debut album is very front-loaded. Like, for the first 5 songs or so, I'm right there with it. I think it's great. I think it sounds amazing. The lyrics are really good. They're working well with the music. I'm right there with it. I like what I'm hearing. And then after that, it just loses steam. It's hard to explain exactly why, because technically nothing has really changed. It's still the same music, still the same lyrical theme, but it just doesn't pack that same punch as the songs which are at the forefront of the album. And as a result, there just comes a point where I'll listen to those first 5 songs and then I'll be like, okay, that's enough, don't need to hear the rest. And I'm kind of surprised at that. I don't think it's because they ran out of material to use with their aesthetic, because there are plenty of bands out there who have not run out of steam, no matter how specific their gimmicks were. I just don't know. It just feels like SheWolf's first album loses me at a certain point and just never picks back up. As for The Big Deal, on the other hand, my first listen through, I don't want to make it sound like I was expecting to hate it, mind you, but I was anticipating the possibility that I would either decide I could take or leave whatever song I just listened to, or have to immediately hit the skip button to get to the next song because whatever I was listening to would offend my senses of what good music sounds like that much. And yet, I listened to the whole thing and didn't once feel like that was the case. It was a consistent album. From beginning to end, every song was at about the same level. Some sounded better than others, sure, but there were no songs that made me want to jump over them and never hear them again. So clearly, any energy they didn't put towards a gimmick was put towards composing good music, and that is a good thing. So, in the end, where does that leave us? Who actually had the better debut? That's the question we asked going in, and I have to say I do kind of think it balances out. It may sound like a cop-out, but I do believe it. I really do think that the 2 albums balance each other out. SheWolf definitely stands out more, but the album loses steam halfway through. The Big Deal doesn't stand out as much, but the album is consistent from beginning to end. As a result, I find myself liking both bands. Although I do like First Bite more as an album, I do really like SheWolf as a concept. So I'm curious to see where they both go and which of them will last longer. Not that I think these 2 bands should be in competition or anything, but it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. And anyway, I figure if you're curious, they've all got music videos on YouTube, so go check them out if you're curious and decide for yourself. As for me, I know where I stand. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni viewer signing off.
Congratulations, you reached the end. If you enjoyed this video, you might want to consider supporting us on Patreon. Of course, the other way to support us is to go to Amazon and check out our books: Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, The Occult Mafia, Emerald of Maddox City, and Assorted Absurdities, Tales of Kaiju Punk and Other Genres. Also check the description for links to DeviantArt and other platforms we operate. Thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.